Everyone, listen to me. We've all been deceived.
Hey, what's up, world? I hope everybody is doing fantastic. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves, keeping up on your exercise, keeping up on your reading, and eating healthy. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about climate. I want to talk about climate because over the last couple of weeks, I've come across these headlines. This one is from The Guardian. It is an opinion piece, but that doesn't really matter. It's still being published and still being presented for the masses. So let's check out the headline. Joe Biden must declare a climate emergency, and he must do so now, says Peter Kalmus. And Peter Kalmus isn't the only person who wants Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency. Let's see what Democracy Now! Has to say. As the UN warns, quote, the era of global boiling has arrived, unquote, Biden resists declaring a climate emergency. This is a story published on July 28th, 2023. I'm actually sorry I didn't have the date for this piece here, but I believe it was just a couple of days before this. It was like late July. Doesn't really matter. All of these headlines, at least all of them but one, comes from like the last 2 or 3 weeks. So let's check out the next one. Nuclear war threat, no worse than climate change. Antony Blinken, that's the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, made a statement on the existential problem of climate change on July 30th while meeting the Australian Prime Minister. Now, what's interesting is that Antony Blinken, he's just basically repeating what Joe Biden had said earlier this year. So let's look at earlier this year. Earlier this year, Biden says climate change, this is January 31st, 2023, 9:39 p.m. That's a weird time, I know. Some people are going to look at them, they're going to be like, Illuminati symbolism! Whatever. Biden says climate change is a bigger threat to humanity than nuclear war. We're going to have a real problem. Biden invoked the possibility of Armageddon during an October speech at a Democratic fundraiser. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about climate. I came across these headlines. They motivated me. I said, you know what? I got to counter all of this misinformation. So I was like, you know what? Let me talk about the weather. No, that's not really me, but for some reason I fell in love with this picture and I decided to use this picture in the video. So we're going to be talking about weather. Now, this isn't the first time I'm going to be talking about climate or the weather. I've of course have a playlist on my other channel, Harmful Content, which somehow I got to 2.2 thousand subs. I'm pretty confident when I created this channel, I was at like 1.7, 1.8 maybe 1,000 subs over here. So I've gained hundreds of subs over here. Meanwhile, this new channel I created hasn't even broken 100 subs. I don't even know how this happens. It's like, are these bots or are people just this dumb? It's like, just look at my last video. It says this channel is over. But anyway, whatever. Let me not digress into this. Anyway, so on this channel, I have a playlist. I have a Climate Live playlist, which has 6 videos. In the first video, I look at the temperature record. I'm like, is the temperature record even reliable? We hear a lot about this record was broken or this temperature over here is on the rise. Well, is that even reliable? These are fundamental questions that people have to ask themselves, but seem not to ask themselves. Like, no, just listen and believe. It's like, oh, you said that? Okay, I'm just gonna believe that. Okay, let's not question the authenticity of that. Let's not question the accuracy of those statements or of those measurements. Let's not question any of that. We live in a perfect world, and in our perfect world, we have a perfect government and perfect scientists, all of whom would do no harm, and all of whom just have, like, the perfect measurements, and they're all just always perfect. They never do anything wrong, and they never say anything wrong. This is the fantasy that some people have. It's the fantasy that their egos have created for them. But whatever. So that's the first video on the list. So the next video is, they just erased all wildfire data before 1983. That's right. What they did, they were just basically like, yeah, before 1983, we just weren't as perfect as we are today. So we're just going to get rid of all of those measurements before 1983. We now live in a new era, a new world, and we don't need all of that past historical data. Actually, not only do we not need it, it's not good enough for us. We're too good for that data, is basically what they're saying. So, just for those who don't know, yes, they now when they look at records, when they look at data, and they say there was a new record broken, that's because their records, or at least their data, at least when it comes to wildfires, only goes back to 1983 now. Anyway, the other videos that I have, one is kind of like a meme video, less than a minute. I guess I should put all of these meme videos I made on TikTok, actually. No, never mind. I hate TikTok. Whatever. So one of them is Joe Rogan gatekeeping for climate change alarmist, and then the other one is a much longer video. Joe Rogan helps spread new climate change propaganda. So the other video is climate emergency conspiracy, the next excuse to go after our rights, or the next excuse to infringe upon our rights. I believe that's the full title of the video. And this one, I believe I do look at some historical data here on the thumbnail. This is the ocean level. This is the historical sea level rise. And it's risen like fucking 300 plus feet over the last 10,000 or so years. Because, of course, the ending of the Ice Age. But anyway, the last video was the U.S. government spends $2 billion a year not to use 25 million acres of farmland. But anyway, I just wanted to summarize those videos for those of you who haven't seen them. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the Earth's climate history. I'm going to be looking at, like, basically 4 billion years of climate history, or at least supposed climate history. This is according to mainstream science, which seems to be pretty reputable nowadays. So let's begin this. Okay, we're going to begin. I'm actually going to take you all on the journey that I had. So for me, this all started with the Laurentide ice sheet. Sometimes I just like to read Wikipedia. I like to see what information is out there on there. And I was looking at ice sheets. I was looking at ice sheets that existed during different ice ages. So the Laurentide ice sheet was a massive sheet of ice that covered millions of square miles, including most of Canada and a large portion of the northern United States. Anyway, because I know that this is already a pretty long video and it's going to be a much longer video, I'm going to just show you an image of this ice sheet. This is an image of the ice sheet. Sorry, it's a little blurry. And basically, it covered this entire region. It was like all of Canada, and it came down to past, I guess this is Chicago over here. Came down over here, past New York. I guess this was New York before the present day. And it was a big fucking ice sheet, alright? Now, after I read a little bit about this ice sheet, it talks about how it played a role in carving out the Great Lakes, changing the flow of water of the Great Lakes. And it talks about all of the geographical effects that the ice sheet had, and so on and so forth. Anyway, after I read a little bit about this ice sheet, I decided to stumble upon glacial periods. A glacial period, alternatively glacial or glaciation, is an interval of time, thousands of years, within an ice age that is marked by colder temperatures and glacial advances. Interglacials, on the other hand, are periods of warmer climate between glacial periods. The last glacial period ended about 15,000 years ago. The Holocene is the current interglacial. A time with no glaciers on Earth is considered a greenhouse climate state. And as you can see, I actually clicked on the greenhouse climate state. We're going to be reading a little bit about that. But first, we're going to be reading a little bit more about glacial periods. And that is, we're going to be reading, if you see here, we're going to be basically reading this section downward. So, quaternary period. Within the quaternary, I believe that's how you say it, quaternary, yeah. Within the quaternary, which started about 2.6 million years before present, there have been a number of glacials and interglacials. at least 8 glacial cycles have occurred in the last 740,000 years alone. Okay, so within the last 740,000 years, I have to repeat this, there's been 8 glacial cycles. So you can see this. This is where we are now over here. Unfortunately, I guess I should have gotten a bigger image of this. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Let me zoom in just a little bit. Really, I can't. All right, whatever. So this is where we are now. And, of course, you can see my screenshots back there. That's fine. There's nothing wrong there. There's just stuff that I'm using for this video. But anyway, this is where we are now. And this is a composite CO2 record. So this is looking at the CO2 record for, it looks like 800,000 years. And it looks like there was a colder period, and then a warmer period, and then a colder period, and then a small, slightly warmer period, much colder. This is slightly warmer than this original warm period, and then we have a cold period. So we have this normal cycle of cold, hot, or high CO2. At least that's what we know. We know it's higher CO2. We know, that's actually something we're going to be talking about, so I'll just wait. I'll wait to talk about the CO2 in a moment. So, I'll just wait, okay? So, we have different things. So, we have over here, like around 400,000 years ago, we actually had a period in time where the CO2 level appears to be higher than the CO2 level is even today. And not just at this point, actually even at this point, there's this huge spike over here. And even this point, so we actually have 3 periods over here with higher CO2 levels than our current day, which is pretty interesting. So anyway, the point is, though, is that this is a very natural and normal cycle. But anyway, let's go back. Let me get this to fit screen again. Alrighty, we are back on track. And then pretty much on this page, it just goes to talk about different glacial periods. It talks about this glacial period, and then it talks about the last glacial period, and it just talks about different things in those periods. It gives very little information here. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go over to the greenhouse and icehouse Earth page that I said we were going to look at before. This is the link with the greenhouse climate state. So when you click on this link, it takes you over here to the greenhouse and icehouse Earth. And there's some very interesting things on this page. So throughout Earth's climate history, the paleoclimate, its climate has fluctuated between 2 primary states, greenhouse and icehouse Earth. Both climate states last for millions of years and should not be confused with glacial and interglacial periods, which occur as alternate phases within an icehouse period and tend to last less than 1 million years. There are 5 known icehouse periods in Earth's climate history, which are known as the Huronian, the Cryogenian, the Andinian-Saharan, the Late Paleozoic, and the Late Cenozoic glaciations. Alright, hopefully I didn't butcher those names too badly. Let's move on to the main factors involved in changes of the paleoclimate, which are believed to be the concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide, or CO2, changes in Earth's orbit, long-term changes in the solar constant, and oceanic and orogenic changes from tectonic plate dynamics. Here it's claimed that one of the main factors involved in changes of the paleoclimate is atmospheric CO2, but later on, it's going to be shown, or at least it's going to be claimed, that atmospheric CO2 isn't a driving factor of the climate, but rather a sign of what the climate is. And I'm going to be talking about why that is in a moment. It then goes on to say greenhouse and icehouse periods have played key roles in the evolution of life on Earth by directly and indirectly forcing biotic adaptation and turnover at various spatial scales across time. Alright, and then after that, they give us this time scale here, which right now means nothing, but we're going to be looking at it in a moment. Actually, I guess we can look at it a little bit and understand it, because here it says that the 5 known icehouse periods in Earth's climate history are known as these names, the Huronian, Cryogenian, so on and so forth, and we can actually see those on this timeline. Alright, so let's look at the next slide. So the next slide, greenhouse Earth. Now this information is actually on the same page as this greenhouse and icehouse Earth. It's just basically the next bit of content right below this. So greenhouse Earth. A greenhouse Earth is a period during which no continental glaciers exist anywhere on the planet. Additionally, the levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, such as water vapor and methane, are high, and sea surface temperatures range from 28 degrees Celsius, or 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit in the tropics, to 0 degrees Celsius, or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, in the polar regions. Earth has been in a greenhouse state for about 85% of its history. Check that shit out. So that's basically what we see on this other slide over here. This is the Earth's climate history right here. So for 85% of its history, it's been in a greenhouse Earth state. So that means over here, the Hadean, the Archean, the Proterozoic, all of these epochs here are all actually greenhouse Earth states where there's no glaciers, or at least there's no land glaciers. How do they define it again? Is a period during which there is no continental glaciers exist anywhere on Earth. So today, we have all these cocksuckers, all of these evil bastards out here talking about we need a climate emergency, we need to start locking down on carbon dioxide, we need to it's the hottest day ever, Earth has never been this bad, all life is going to end. AOC actually had a slide of AOC. Let me see if I have the slide over here. AOC. Did I really delete the slide? I guess I deleted the slide. That's very unfortunate. Oh, no, I know where the slide is. I'm looking in the wrong area. Come on, where are you, AOC? I know you're here. You're in my downloads. Here we go. Here she is. Here she comes. Ocasio-Cortez, world will end in 12 years if climate change not addressed. Okay, this was in 2019. Meanwhile, the Earth has actually been in a greenhouse state for 85% of its history. How insane is that? Where are the scientists? Where are these climate scientists? Why are they not coming out and saying this? I mean, clearly they're not really climate scientists, those ones who are fucking acting hysterical over this. Because if they were, they'd be like, oh yeah, this is a perfectly normal thing. These are the cycles of the Earth. We are just small little ants crawling on the surface of this magnificent marble. Our activities have very little effect, if any at all. I mean, just look at Earth's history. But anyway, let's read on, right? I don't want to just end the video here with this tantrum. So anyway, the state should not be confused, the state should not be confused with a hypothetical runaway greenhouse effect, which is an irreversible tipping point that corresponds to the ongoing runaway greenhouse effect on Venus. The IPCC, which stands for the it stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So the IPCC, which is like the authoritative body on this stuff, states that, quote, a runaway greenhouse effect, analogous to that of Venus, appears to have virtually no chance of being induced by anthropogenic activities. That's man-made activities. So these people acknowledge that humans, at least so long as we don't go to some sort of crazy nuclear war with each other, humans, our activities, are not going to lead to a runaway greenhouse effect. So anyway, let's look at the causes. They have causes down here. Causes. There are several theories as to how a greenhouse Earth can come about. Geologic climate proxies indicate that there is a strong correlation between a greenhouse state and high CO2 levels. However, it is important to recognize that high CO2 levels are interpreted as an indicator of Earth's climate rather than an independent driver. So CO2, if you actually look at the charts, and this is actually something that I've seen Tony Heller talk about, and I've recommended Tony Heller in my other climate videos. But Tony Heller, he's another guy who talks a lot about climate, and he does a lot to try to break down this climate lie or this climate hysteria. But anyway, he looks at the CO2 charts, and he actually shows that the temperature changes before the CO2 does. So when there's a rise in temperature and there's a rise in CO2, the rise in CO2 actually follows very shortly after the rise in temperature. So CO2 is actually just an indicator, as it says here, of Earth's climate rather than an independent driver. Now, what really happens is the following, is CO2 and other gases, they simply get trapped in ice. They get trapped in the ice. When the planet gets cold, they get trapped in the ice, so the CO2 levels will naturally go down. And then when the Earth heats up and the ice is melting and there's more activity, the CO2 and other gas levels will increase as that CO2 escapes the ice, and not just the ice itself, but areas that are under the ice. Like, I believe that it's pretty well known that there's like a shit ton of methane that's trapped under the frozen tundra in like Siberia and like other frozen places. Like, there's just a bunch of gases that are just trapped, and that's exactly what happens. And this is why CO2 levels are an indicator of the climate. We can look at those CO2 levels and we can say, hey, there was a lot of ice on the Earth, or there wasn't a lot of ice on the Earth. And that's basically what they're doing. But what these liars are doing is they're looking at these charts and they're saying, no, the CO2, that's a driver of the climate. That's an independent driver of the climate. And they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They do know what they're talking about, but they're freaking liars and they're intentionally lying. But anyway, let's move on. Other phenomena have instead likely played a key role in influencing global climate by altering oceanic and atmospheric currents and increasing the net amount of solar radiation absorbed by Earth's atmosphere. Such phenomena may include, but are not limited to, tectonic shifts that result in the release of greenhouse gases such as CO2 and CH4 via volcanic activity. Volcanoes emit a massive amount of CO2 and methane into the atmosphere when they are active, which can trap enough heat to cause a greenhouse effect. Okay, huge pause right there. Now, the problem that I have with this statement is that I've lived through some pretty massive volcanoes. In our lifetime, some pretty massive volcanoes have gone off. And you know what the result was? It was a cooling of the Earth, not a heating of the Earth. So this 1991 eruption, the 1991 Mount Pinatubo, probably pronouncing that incorrectly, eruption in the Philippines is a modern example of this. It cooled the planet by about 1 degree Fahrenheit, or 0.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, and that's not the only one. There was another one in 1883. The Krakatoa eruption had an explosive force of a 200 megaton bomb, killing more than 36,000 people and cooling the entire Earth by an average of 0.6 degrees Celsius for months to come. So over here, they're all like, oh yeah, these volcanoes going off, releasing all this CO2 and methane into the sky can trap heat, causing a greenhouse Earth effect. But it's like, wait a second, the physical evidence tells us differently. And actually what happens is that it gets the atmosphere all cloudy, and it blocks the sun's rays from penetrating and heating up the Earth. See, this idea that this gas in the atmosphere is going to create a greenhouse Earth makes it as if like the heat comes from within the Earth. It's like our heat doesn't really come from within the Earth, it comes from the sun. So technically, if you block out the sun, or if you get all these gases in the atmosphere, you're not going to necessarily trap heat inside of the Earth, as you are going to be stopping heat from getting to the Earth to begin with. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there's more to that science, and I'm sure that there is. I'm sure that there's a lot of variables to it. But based off of what I've seen, these volcanic eruptions, they actually have a cooling effect. Anyway, on Earth, atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane are higher, trapping solar energy in the atmosphere via the greenhouse effect. Methane, the main component of natural gas, is responsible for more than a quarter of the current global warming. It's a formidable pollutant with an 80-fold higher global warming potential than CO2 in the 20 years after it's been introduced into the atmosphere. You know, they say this, and there's a lot of things about this. Really, the worst global warming gas or whatever, like the biggest contributor to this global warming phenomena that they talk about, which, you know, of course they over-embellish, the biggest contributor to it is water vapor. And I sort of talk about this in my video. I believe it's titled How to Argue Against Chemtrails or something like that. It's my video about chemtrails. And basically water vapor should be their biggest concern, but they haven't figured out how to, you know, become tyrants over water vapor. But anyway, that's a topic for a video that I already made. So anyway, here it just says a little bit more. It's just like, you know, talking about CO2. The main thing I want to talk about here, though, was this, you know, independent driver. Want to talk about CO2. Want to look at the stuff about volcanoes. Let's look at the next slide. The next slide is the ice house Earth. Earth is now in an ice house state, and ice sheets are present in both poles simultaneously. That's right, Earth is now in an ice house state, which the Earth's climate has only really been in for about 15% of its entire climate history. But they, the powers that shouldn't be, want you to believe that this ice house state is perfectly normal. But anyway, enough of the jokes. So, climatic proxies indicate that greenhouse gas concentrations tend to lower during an ice house Earth. Similarly, global temperatures are also lower under ice house conditions. Earth then fluctuates between glacial and interglacial periods, and the size and the distribution of continental ice sheets fluctuate dramatically. Anyway, I'm just going to leave this here. Let me see what other slides. Of course, we have the causes for this, and it pretty much says the same thing. Here it says pretty much the exact same thing about CO2. Basically, it says that, yes, CO2 levels are lowered during an ice house state. However, that does not mean that decreasing atmospheric levels of CO2 is a primary driver of a transition to the ice house state. So here, once again, CO2 is not a primary driver of climate. Rather, it's just an indicator of other solar, geologic, and atmospheric processes at work. And then it has 3 citations for that. And then it goes on to say that some potential drivers for previous ice house states includes the movement of tectonic plates, and basically they talk about the different opening of water passages and closing of water passages, and they say that when these water passages open or close, it changes the flow of hot and cold water to different parts of the globe, which then affect the total climate. So basically, sea currents. So this essentially affects sea currents, and not only sea currents, but then atmospheric currents are also affected by mountain ranges appearing and disappearing. So those are the primary causes of Earth's climate. And then, of course, this page also gives the snowball Earth theory, and then it talks about the different glacials and interglacial periods. And then at the end, it gives us a list of icehouse and greenhouse periods. So Earth's history, when we look at it, a greenhouse period ran from 4.6 to 2.4 billion years ago. So this period, that's about 2.2 billion years in a greenhouse period. And then it entered an icehouse state, which is in blue, and this is the Huronian glaciation. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that timeline that we were looking at before, and I'm going to put it up here. Okay, we're going to look at them both. We'll look at them both here. So this greenhouse period, this one that ran for basically 2.2 billion years, is this one. So from 4.6, this is billion years ago. This is in millions of years. So it's like, 4,600 million years ago is basically 4.6 billion to about 2.4 billion. This is the greenhouse period. And then you have this icehouse period, which is actually a relatively small period. And when we look at it, we see that it actually only ran from about 2.4 billion to about 2.1 billion years ago. So this is only about 300 million years this icehouse period lasted for. And then there was a greenhouse period from 2.1 billion years ago to 720 million years ago. So this one also, it's like, what is this, like a little over 1 billion years. Like almost 1 billion years of a greenhouse state. And then we have the cryogenian, which is this next one. This is this one over here. This is the cryogenian. We got the cryogenian, which ran from about 720 million years ago to 635 million years ago. So this is actually less than 100 million years. So the first one was 300 million. This one's 100 million. And then we get another greenhouse state from about 635 million years ago to 450 million years ago. This greenhouse state is much shorter than the previous greenhouse states. And you can see these are also getting shorter, the greenhouse states. So from like 2 billion to like 1 billion to like a couple hundred million. This is like less than 200 million. To then we get another icehouse state, which is only like only lasts for about 30 million years, from 450 million to 420 million years ago. So this has also gotten much shorter, only 30 million years. Then we get another greenhouse state, which is less than 100 million years also, again, getting shorter and shorter. Then we get the late Paleozoic Ice Age, and that one was about a solid 100 million years. Okay, that got longer. Then we got another greenhouse state, which is actually a solid 200 million years. That got longer. So now we got shorter. It looks like we got to like the shortest possible period to now we're getting longer. And now we have our current icehouse period, which has been going for about 33 million years. They're saying the current icehouse period began some 33.9 million years ago. But anyway, the last thing I want to say is that for those of you who don't believe in conspiracies, this is well-documented information. This was like mainstream science a couple of decades ago, before they were really going hard with all this global warming nonsense. And now, they've buried all this information. When do you ever see them talk about this? During any sort of climate change discussion or anything like that, when do you ever hear them talk about this? Do you think it's because they don't know this information? Do you think it's just accidental? Do you think that it's because they think that it's frivolous information, that's not so important? No, this is very important information. It ties directly into the conversation that they're having. But they don't talk about it. You know why? Because there is a conspiracy. Because there is something very wrong with our government and our world. And none of it is going to change until we at least begin to acknowledge this fact, and also acknowledge the fact that we can change it. Without force, without violence. But anyway, I'm going to end the video here. You all take it easy, take care of yourselves, exercise, eat healthy, enjoy the life that you've been given, and don't take anything for granted.
I don't like the way you think, and I don't like the way you run this colony, and I don't like you. Things are going to change around here.